What is BYU Pathway? Who does it serve? How does it work? Like, what is that whole program?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, this maybe here's a little throwback since we're talking about Rick's College. 1997, when the Taylor Chapel, the beautiful building in the center of campus there, was dedicated. The story that Elder Bednar, then President Bednar, told us is that he was sitting in the corridor with President Eyring, who was then the Commissioner of Education, and a comment was made where he said, "We do so much for so few people, and we do so little for so many."
Looking for a cool, delicious way to beat the summer heat? Try Postma's refreshing cold beverages. Enjoy a creamy Postma frappe made with milk and just the right touch of sweetener for a smooth, energizing treat. Or dive into a rich Postma milkshake, perfect for those sunny days when you want something tasty and satisfying. Postum gives you that delightful caffeine-free boost with every sip. This summer, chill out with Postum. Refreshment you can feel good about.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Mormons with your hosts, Matt and Melissa. And today we're doing an interview with one of my great friends and our special guest, John Wilson. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey there, Matt and Melissa. Good to see you again, Matt. I'm John Wilson, married to Jessica. We have 6 kids. I grew up in Southern California and born and raised, went on a mission to Brazil, went to Rick's College when Elder Bednar was the president, graduated from BYU, Idaho, before when that was a new thing. And
We'll,
yeah, so that's sort
we'll,
of
we'll start there,
me in 30
John.
seconds.
So, Melissa also went to Rick's College, but I don't think she
Yeah.
loved it quite as much as you loved it.
Well,
Oh, okay.
we've interviewed President Meredith before. And listen, I think that it's probably a wonderful place to be now. I just found Rexburg to be a hole in the pit of the world. That's all.
Yeah, I always say that, the best 9 days of the year are summer in Rexburg. And
Perfect.
when Matt and I were in the same ward for a few years, when I came back to work at BYU Idaho at the Pathway program, yeah, it was we had to adjust our Arizona body temperature to Rexburg. Yeah, so it's interesting too, Melissa, because I remember looking at like the campuses they were rated, and BYU Idaho got like 5-star ratings in every category except for location. It was like 3 out of 5
Yeah.
stars.
Well, and I'm sure it's changed a lot. Here's a funny story. So I went there before I got married. And then after I got married, my husband went there for a little bit. And so our married apartment, we moved into student housing and it was over the summer. So we moved into student housing. It was married student housing, but they had 6 twin beds bolted to the walls. So we couldn't even push them together and
Wow.
make, and we were like, well, this is interesting married housing, 6 twin beds. So we only lived there for a few months and then we moved into an off campus apartment, but it was quirky.
Yeah. Yeah, that I think they've grown a little bit since then, but I can see why your experience was not 5 stars.
So, John, a lot of our listeners have heard of BYU Pathway. They've probably heard it mentioned in general conference and such. Um, can you kind of explain, because you've been with BYU Pathway almost from the beginning. I mean, maybe not, but pretty close. Like, what is BYU Pathway? Who does it serve? How does it work? Like, what is that whole program?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, this maybe here's a little throwback since we're talking about Rick's College. 1997, when the Taylor Chapel, the beautiful building in the center of campus there, was dedicated. The story that Elder Bednar, then President Bednar, told us is that he was sitting in the corridor with President Eyring, who was then the Commissioner of Education, and a comment was made where he said, "We do so much for so few people, and we do so little for so many." So you have this interesting string of revelatory prophetic statements from presidents of Rick's College. In 1971, President Eyring said that we need to expand beyond this campus to serve young people all throughout the world. And then you have Elder Bednar in 1997 say we need to serve youth in Rhode Island and Rome as well as Rexburg. And then you have Kim Clark come in 2005, and he says, well, we need to break down the barriers of time and space. We need to lower the cost of education and serve more people around the world. So all that is a lead up to what BYU Pathway is, which is higher education, online certificate and degree access wherever the church is organized. So if you're living, just got back from Papua New Guinea last week. BYU Pathway is in remote Papua New Guinea. BYU Pathway is in Sierra Leone, West Africa. It's in Ukraine. It's in Utah, of all the exotic places, and it's all over. And they have 80,000 students they serve, and they are growing and serving lots of good people. I worked there from 2014 to this last year, when I was invited to take a role with the church educational system in a different role, working with youth, preparing them for BYU Pathway, and also preparing them for just higher education in general. So there you go. There's your 2-minute summary of BYU Pathway.
Okay, well, that's interesting, the role in preparing youth, because in my mind, Pathway was primarily for non-traditional students, like for students who weren't just exiting high school. Is that not the case?
Really, what it's turned into is a broader category is, do you want higher education, but do you not have access to one of the church campuses? Do you not have access to awesome Dr. Miles political science courses, the great author, the great leader? And, so if you don't have access to the campuses of the church, so you have different types of persons. So when I was initially starting, we launched a program in Utah. People said, why is this thing going to work in Utah? Well, you have a huge group, especially Latter-day Saint women over 30 at that time, who were just like, I want to go back and get a degree. I raised a family. I want to go back and get my education. And BYU Pathway is perfect for that kind of demographic. But it's also perfect for Jacob Omai, who I was just with in Papua New Guinea, who is a recently returned missionary, doesn't have access to any higher education institutions in his country because he can't afford them because they're too expensive. So it's perfect balance for people in those extreme situations. So really, it's anybody who needs access to a great church education university degree.
And I want to come back to what you're doing now, because Melissa and I had talked about this on the podcast a year or so ago when they sort of were announcing this stuff. But just a little bit more on BYU Pathway. So if I'm a student, let's say that I live in like Kenya or Liberia or whatever, I'm an international student. Why would I choose BYU Pathway over trying to come to BYU Idaho and Rexburg, or come to BYU in Provo? Like, what does BYU Pathway offer them why they wouldn't want to try to come to the United States?
Well, it's a great question. I think part of it is just the short answer is that there's just the limited space, right? No matter how many, the demand is always going to exceed the campus space. So frankly, my BYU Idaho experience, I know people went to BYU and to BYU Hawaii. That is a tremendously wonderful experience. It's like, and nothing really replaces that, frankly. But if you are one of the 90% plus of the church of the young adults that will never have the hope of getting access, it gives you access to those accredited educational courses. What we do as well, or what they do, what we do, we work together as a system, is helping those youth get jobs. Remote jobs is a big push right now. So if I'm sitting in Liberia and I'm a return missionary, I was with all these North American companions and we were doing such a great job. Now I'm home and there's nothing for me. There's a 60% unemployment rate. There's no jobs available. There's not a lot of hope. So BYU Pathway has now connected to U.S. companies through a lot of great networking, and they're hiring these students in remote jobs. So if they have a computer, they got an internet, and if they speak English, and if they're a BYU Pathway student, they can get a job that can pay them a wage where they can provide for a family. And now they have hope that they can get married. They have hope that they can be able to have children. It really is changing the church. It's a miracle to see. I just got back, from West Africa a few months ago. It brings so much hope to young people because they would, to the original question, Matt, they would love to go to BYU Idaho campus, but it's just not an option. They can't get the $15,000 to sponsor, whatever the amount is to sponsor, to get the visa. There's so many hoops to jump through, and most people, it's prohibitive for them to do that. But for those few who can, what a blessing for them to come to the campus, and they should. I don't think it's a competitive thing. It's just more of a complimentary thing.
Do they have to know English to do BYU Pathway?
Currently, they do, but the what was recently approved by the first presidency is BYU Pathway in Portuguese, and that's starting this
Hmm.
fall. So in Brazil, it's starting there, and it's going to be starting a little small. But Portuguese is the first non-English language that they've been approved for. But otherwise, all the rest of the bachelor's degrees and certificates, you'd have to be able to speak English for that.
Okay, that was one of my questions. So, what do the degrees look like? You're talking about traditional bachelor's degrees, but then also certificates. What are we talking about when we say that?
Well, that wonderful leader, Elder Clark, who was the president of BYU Idaho, brought in his modularity research as a scholar and said, let's build stackable certificates that allow somebody to get a chunk of education early on. Because if you look at even the US population, 85% of lowest quartile income earners drop out of college within 6 years. So it's like really a bad deal if you're a low income person. And it's much worse even internationally than that. So basically, your higher education becomes like a let's get you into debt because you're not going to finish a bachelor's degree. So instead, if you're sitting in Nigeria now or in West Jordan, Utah, you can get a certificate in web design. And it takes you just 1 year to complete. It's 5 courses. And then all that's going to get you a job ready skill that you can market. Here's a story of a young woman I met in Arizona when I was working with the US territory. She was saying she finished her certificate and she goes over to, she's buying a new car. It's in a small dealership and she does a web design certificate. She says to the owner, do you have a website? He says, yeah, but it's not very good. She said, I actually can design websites. And she pulled out a little portfolio to show some of her work that she had done in her classes. And she got hired in a remote job right away. So you take that skill and you put it to the marketplace, but you can do it earlier than a 4 year bachelor's degree that often the value only comes at the very end. We've moved the value proposition earlier in the cycle. So that if somebody even just has to stop after 1 year because life happens, they have something to show for it. They can market their skills. That's so you have 3 certificates that stack into a bachelor's degree. That's how
Oh,
the structure is built.
oh, that's
So you get
really cool.
yeah. So that's how it works.
Yeah.
And I think also, and maybe I'm wrong about this, John, isn't it also you sort of push the general ed classes to the end of the degree? You kind of start in the kind of the meat of the degree, and then if you really want the bachelor's degree, you finish up your GEs at the very end of the degree instead of doing it at the beginning.
That's right. It prevents people like me. This was my problem. I was a super senior, okay, because I changed my major later on, and usually people do that, right? I don't know what percentage of college students do that, but I did it, and so I had all these credits. But the idea is, let's test early what your interest is. Let's have you jump right into a business certificate, and if you don't like it, then that way you can pivot over to communications or to healthcare or something else that's of interest to you. So that's going to be the benefit. Elder Gilbert, the Commissioner of Education, sort of he uses this example. I may be butchering. Sorry, Elder Gilbert, if you're listening, but we have this. But you have this idea of zebras, and like, why do they have stripes? Well, when they're in front of a lion as a pack, it really messes with the lion's brain. It actually is a protective measure for them to be able to confuse the lion. Well, Elder Gilbert talks about that with degree. Like, there's 300 majors, and we put a freshman into college and say, hey, guess what? Just figure it out. And by the end, you have to figure out what you're going to do. So we tried to sort of simplify that up front and say, this is your choice. Let's have you try that out.
Yeah, I love this out of the box thinking. It feels like we're solving all of the problems with college. Like really, honestly. Talk to me a little bit though, because I feel like people are skeptical about online education. I personally got my master's entirely online and it was a great experience, but I'm a traditional learner and it was really easy for me to navigate.
Yeah, I think that it's the changing tides, right? I think 20 years ago, especially, that some of that sort of comes over. But during COVID, 98% of all universities were online, even the traditional ones, right? I received my doctorate degree on, at the end, the last year, even though it was a traditional degree at University of Utah, the last year was online just because of COVID. And so I think that people are shifting in that. And really, what Elder Gilbert and the commissioner and all the rest of the folks will mention is that the survey shows more about outcomes, right? What are you learning as an outcome versus the delivery method? So if we track the outcomes and the learning gains, you actually see that online education is highly competitive. It's never going to replace the best professors, Matt Miles.
That's
Never
right.
going to replace the best of them, but it's going to actually help in that middle category. It actually is better than the worst of them. And there, you have a wide range of professors at every university, right, at different skill sets, but it gives you a little bit tighter control in the middle of that. So it's a positive experience. And bad classes with bad teachers are measured. And so they can easily modify those classes to make them better because it's online and the data is all there and trackable. So those are some of the benefits. So I think that you see Western Governors University, for example, is I think one of the largest in the US. Very successful outcomes, very successful placements. You're seeing that kind of tide change and the perceptions change of online education over the years.
Yeah. And are we worried about the socialization effects of college? Now, me personally, I want to go to college to get the information that I need to get the learning, to get the training. But I know a lot of parents send their students out into the world because socialization is a big part of what they want from college.
It's a great question. So BYU Pathway for the first year, they have a socialization. You're just like we're podcasting here. We're having this social interaction.
Mhm.
They're doing that with all their classmates live every week, as well as doing their online asynchronous coursework. So all of that's going to be something that allows these students to be able to have a social experience. Another interesting thing is the first presidency is approved in certain locations around the world. This isn't widely known, but it's also not secret. What's called global education centers. Think of like a mini university experience. These are opened up in Nigeria, Ghana, and the Philippines and South Africa. And there's 8 more coming in the next couple of years. These centers are essentially like a little BYU Hawaii campus, a little Ensign College campus, where 1,000 or more students can come gather and socialize together. So you see the online,
Wow.
but you still see this physical component that's being emphasized by the senior brethren. So I think between what BYU Pathway offers to everybody and these global education centers for some places, it does help address that concern.
Are
Yeah,
these
that's
global
really
edu-
cool.
are these global education centers really a place to help kids get married? Because sometimes I feel like that's what church schools are really about, is helping kids get
Hey,
married.
I needed all the help I could get because I got my bachelor's degree as a bachelor. Thankfully, I met Jessica like a week before I graduated, and then we were able to date. Thank goodness. Some of us are low performing menace to societies, and I was one of those people. But yeah, I do think, no doubt about it, eternal families are awesome, and it's good to meet good people. Jessica's from rural Wyoming, which is, I guess, all of Wyoming is rural. But she's like outside of a town of 1,000 people type of rural. And I'm from Los Angeles area. So, we would have never really connected unless it was for BYU Idaho Ricks College campus. And so I think, yeah, it gives you an opportunity to connect with people as well as learning.
So
Yeah.
back
But
back go ahead, Melissa.
oh yeah, well, I just wanted to say, like, I think it is a joke that you're, setting these up for people to meet and get married. But I do think a big part of a college education is making connections for your career and for the forward movement of what you want to do in your life. So I think a lot of times when I tell students, give advice about where you should head to college, it's not so much what the college is as it is about being able to meet the people that you need to meet in your life. So I think, the connection aspect is important from that perspective.
No, for
Yeah.
sure. Building a social
Amen.
network is a huge part of college. You need to build that network of people you're going to work with.
Yeah.
Amen to that. 100%.
So, John, back in the day, I heard President Hinckley talk a lot about the Perpetual Education Fund. How does that play into BYU Pathway, or if at all?
Yeah, well, it's sort of two different tracks to get to the same objective. Okay, so the objective is helping people earn what we would call a church living wage. And what does that mean? Well, all of us who are able to serve in Relief Society presidency or, bishopric callings and give 20 plus hours a week, we generally have to be able to be self-reliant enough to be able to provide for our kids and serve with our excess energy and capacity. But you have people, especially in low income countries, who just can't do that. They're working 3 jobs or there's no jobs. And so, when you look at the opportunity to receive an education and get employment, it really increases your likelihood to be successful in life and in the church and in your communities. You can't serve your community very well. You can't run for government office unless you are self-reliant. So this is a problem that President Hinckley was inspired to address. And the Perpetual Education Fund still continues to this day. But what they do is more local education loans. So if I want to become a refrigerator repair technician, BYU Pathway online will never be able to teach that skill probably. That they're going to teach more business, technology, public health, those types of degrees. But the local, more vocational education options can be through the perpetual education fund. So really, everybody has an option in these low-income countries, so they can pursue that. But BYU Pathway and the Welfare Self-Reliance, which is what runs Perpetual Education Fund, work very closely together as partners, as well as my current role in the church educational system. We meet often. We meet with Sharon Eubank actually every month just to visit with her, and because we're aligning our resources for humanitarian, welfare, self-reliance, and education. We're all trying to get to the same outcome.
Hmm. I had a disagreement with the general authority once. I won't say his name, but I was telling him, I was like, I love the church because I feel like we're the only organization in the world that can take a person, no matter where they're at in their life, and get them to their best possible place in life. And he was like, well, there's lots of organizations that can do that. And I was like, I know, but the church is better than anyone else. And I think he maybe thought I was just talking about BYU Idaho or something like that. But I really do appreciate that, like, the church really does that. And it's not to say other people can't. Maybe other people can, but I'm so impressed with the efforts that the church makes. It's about spiritual development, right? It's about emotional development and all that other stuff. But really, we all are really trying hard to get people from wherever you are in life to your best possible place you can be in life. I think it's awesome.
I think that's what true religion is, right? It's ministering to those who need, support and help to be successful. And education and the gospel combined is a potent game changer in the world because you have a divine vision of who you are, and you also are pairing that with secular education. And it really is what makes places like BYU, BYU Idaho, BYU Pathway special places to serve and be. It changes everything. It changed me. I was a low performing student in California, came to Ricks College and took a class from this guy named David Bednar, and it was like the most wonderfully life changing spiritually thing. I sort of sensed that he would get a certain calling in the future, but it really is a game changer for people around the world to get a church education.
So BYU Pathways does have that religious element. How does that work? Are you taking institute classes, or is it because of the professors who are teaching you?
Yeah, so the religion department at BYU Pathway is institute. So the seminaries and institutes. So you take 14 credits of institute, just like a BYU Idaho degree would take 14 religion credits on campus. That is required. And then all the courses, just like, I imagine in Dr. Miles' course, there's probably a prayer and there's going to be some spiritual elements to classroom discussions. So I teach a business class that I've taught for many years. And so online as an adjunct faculty for BYU Idaho. So we're going to integrate into those discussions spiritual principles. We'll share quotes from general authorities that relate to business or finance or whatever it may be. So yeah, you do get that system where it's spiritually uplifting, a place where testimonies can grow.
This is why, Melissa, at University of Utah, your testimony went there to die because you didn't have that at the University of
Hey,
Utah.
I'm teased by my colleagues as well. That's where I went for graduate school as well. So I'm hanging on by a thread too, I guess, Melissa. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
But there is this element of, like, sometimes I look at everything that we have for members of the church in Utah and Idaho, and I think, why can't we have this for everybody? And so I really love that BYU Pathway is an effort to do that. So to transition into what you're doing now, John. So Melissa and I were, when we go through the news on our monthly podcast, we were talking about how they're now putting in seminaries and institutes this kind of curriculum about life skills. And I know that that's not all you do, but that's part of what you do. Is that something that Melissa and I should be laughing about?
Maybe. You guys are fun people, and I like to laugh with you, so we can laugh together. So it's an interesting thing. So really, seminaries and institutes has been scripture-based teaching, right, as well as other gospel principles teaching. That's Elder Gilbert calls it the spiritual anchor of the church educational system, right? That's sort of its job to do it in the system. BYU Idaho is the teacher. SNI is the religious anchor. So everyone has a role. So about a year ago, I was asked to consider this new assignment for a working with our church's secondary education system. So we have all these 18 plus people taking BYU Pathway around the world, but what about people who are just not even ready for BYU Pathway, or who won't get ready for it, or who need to be younger? So really, what the brethren have given is more educational resources to young people, ages 11 and up, And so I'll just share what I do, and then I'll tie that to your question of seminaries and institutes. So my employer is Seminaries and Institutes. So I report to Chad Webb, who's the president or administrator of all the Seminaries and Institutes organization. He also has an assignment. His title is Administrator of Seminaries and Institutes and Church Primary and Secondary Schools. And like, what's that? Well, a lot of people don't know this, but the church still has 16 primary and secondary school campuses in 5 countries in Latin America and the Pacific. So we serve about 7,000 students a year, from kindergarten all the way up to seniors of high school. And so that's a part of the assignment that I was given, is overseeing that system. So we have a very capable superintendent who lives in New Zealand, who oversees the whole Pacific area and helps us with our Mexico school as well. The other part of my job is called the Succeed in School program. And you're like, wow, that's very descriptive. And it is. That's what it is. It's a program the church put for youth to succeed in the schools where they are. And this includes teaching life skills, teaching reading, writing, and math, in exam preparation skills that pretty much any youth, including my own kids, needs some help with sometimes. Whether you're living in the Pioneer Corridor, or if you're living in Papua New Guinea, you need help. So seminary also integrated some lessons into the seminary program. They're called life preparation lessons. So they're going to teach something on emotional resilience, or temple preparation, or mission preparation. Our program of Succeed in School is very much tied hand in glove with the seminary program. So a youth in, I'll just give Ghana as an example, usually they take seminary after school, just because that's where most of Africa, they take it after school. So in addition to taking seminary, they take this Succeed in School program, where volunteer teachers are going to teach them math, reading, writing, and these other subjects, exam prep, life skills. And what happens is we're seeing the same thing happen at BYU Idaho, but now for 11-year-olds in Sierra Leone, where they get confidence of their divine destiny, of who they are, and they learn how to learn. And they're actually, and you're like, John, these are volunteer teachers, and like, is that really effective? It's amazing to see that 95% or more of the students report they've improved their math, they've improved their reading and writing, they've been passing their high stakes exams. So it's really a miracle that it's actually making a huge impact. And it serves about 30,000 students in 30 different countries right now. So it's growing significantly. And that's why I was just in Papua New Guinea. We were helping expand the program in that country.
Okay, listen, you've just given me my life's goal. When you say volunteers, are these missionaries?
Yeah. So usually what happens, so think of it this way. Melissa, where do you live? Which part of the
I
world?
live in Cache Valley in
Cache Valley.
Wellsville,
Okay.
Utah. Yep.
So in Cache Valley, if you, and it's probably better outside of Utah. So we'll give you, let's say Kansas, right? I think Matt lived there for a while. So if you're in Kansas and your state president comes to you and says, "You're just so awesome, Melissa. We would love you to teach seminary." And you're like, "Great." So I'm going to do that. So that's the same model that a Succeed in School teacher gets called, except instead of teaching seminary, you're teaching either math, if you're good at that, or you're teaching reading and writing, or you're teaching life skills. So it's really a called teacher, a stake calling, as opposed to a missionary. Although we do have missionaries serving in the Succeed in School program, the larger model is more of just like the Seminary and Institutes model. So what happens is that S&I coordinator, they sort of have a dotted line to our team of Succeed in School, and they're going to run the academic program alongside the religious education program in the country. So if you are like, "Hey, I'm totally interested in this," and if it's coming to Cache Valley at some point, and you're like, "Hey, I'd love to, talk to your state president and say I'd love to be involved with the Succeed in School program."
Yeah, that's super cool.
Is it open to, because I'm thinking Kansas and the number of students that came to my seminary class when I was a seminary teacher there, like that was hard getting them to seminary. Is it only members of the church or do they advertise it widely?
The cool thing about Succeed in School, it actually is like BYU Pathway for youth in so many ways. And the reason I say that is because a third of BYU Pathway students are friends of the church, and a third of Succeed in School students are friends of the church as well. So it's open. In fact, just a quick story. I was in Sierra Leone, which is a Muslim country, and we were visiting our church branch there in Freetown, and I was told by the seminary coordinator a year ago, before Succeed in School started, there was 15 youth participating in seminary. And then I walk in to this rented building and I see outdoors, there's about 150 youth and they're all divided into different classes. There's a math class upstairs. There's a reading and writing class. There's a study and life skills class. And there's 150 kids, and most of them are Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, and they are learning the gospel. And we invite them to participate in seminary. And guess what? They're part of seminary, and they get to learn the doctrines of the gospel. I was in a house of a Muslim sister, Seliote, in Ghana, and this is Western Ghana. And we were just in her home visiting with her, just asking about her children's experience because she's a devout Muslim. And we said, well, what do you think about this? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is giving you your children this education in seminary. And she looked at us and she got emotional. And she said, my kids would have no hope in the school that they're in, that they could pass their exams. But they're now passing their exams. And I'm so grateful to your church for helping give education to us. And she looked at me and she says, but I have a question for you. Do my kids have to serve a mission when they turn 18 or 19 in your church? And I looked at her and I said, no, they don't have to serve a mission, but they can join Institute and BYU Pathway when they turn 18. And she says, great, then I'm happy with that. So it really gives hope, not just to members of the Church of Jesus Christ, but it gives to people all throughout the world. And we just tell them, come. And our teachers teach them regardless of their background. It really is a miraculous thing. You guys, let's go to Africa or Papua New Guinea one of these days. We'll give you a tour, and you guys can do a little volunteer teaching for us, maybe.
That would be so fun. So, does it cost them money? Is this totally free?
Totally free. The church, this is one of those cool things that you read of that great donation that the church gives to the world. This is part of that. The church pays for all the workbooks. We provide all the real estate so that they can be in these classrooms, the desks, the chairs, the pencils, if they can't afford pencils. That's all covered. And it's a really cool thing in West Africa as well. The area presidency has approved with humanitarian that the kids who come, they're at school all day, right? Then they're going to seminary and they're going to succeed in school for 2 hours after school. You're like, wow, that's a lot. And it is. But the humanitarian provides a nutritious meal to all the students in West Africa. So they get a carbohydrate, a protein, a vegetable, and they're actually taught a welfare self-reliance nutrition lesson. Because you asked about the perpetual education fund. This is why we're all one team, right? The church education system, the perpetual welfare self-reliance, we're all gathering around to help bless the one. And so this little girl in Sierra Leone, you just get emotional because you think about it. She gets one meal a day. She's so skinny. She does not get very much. And when I walked into the classroom and see her learning math, getting confidence, and then afterwards they all open up their meals and they're so grateful. And this little girl, she saved part of her meal for her little sister who was not old enough to succeed in school. And I just thought to myself, this is what Jesus Christ would do right now if he were here. He would feed the hungry, he would educate them, and he would say, behold your little ones. And it just is a miracle. I mean, I know I'm biased because I'm working in this system, but it really has been eye-opening.
Well, this is amazing. I can't believe I haven't heard of any of this before. It's really nice for you to explain how it all fits together, all of these pieces. We don't do a good enough job in our church of publicizing this kind of stuff that we're doing. We have a lot of members of the church who criticize how we use our finances and why it's not like more of an open door. And I'm like, but if they could see what we're doing, you know what I mean? If they could see things like this, it's amazing. This is really cool.
I had a really spiritual experience. So when I was bishop, we probably because I was bishop, we had one of my friends remove his names from the church. So he was so maybe I was like, hey,
The
Bishop
bishop is
Wilson,
a
good job.
problem.
Good job. You're getting another name removal. Okay.
Okay.
Not so great. Let's fire this guy. No, but he's a friend of mine and I still minister to him. I'm his ministering brother now. And I was in his home telling him just what I just told you guys, the same, because he was asking us like, what do you do for work? And I told him this story and he got emotional and he said, that's what it's about. He said, that's what it's about. And you're right. I think people think of like, they have misunderstandings about the church's investments, which by the way, it uses to create more resources to serve more people.
Right.
Do this kind of thing. It's not cheap to feed, 30,000 kids in Africa. It's not cheap to print workbooks for them. It's not cheap to serve them, but it's a miracle that it's working. BYU Pathway, Perpetual Education Fund, all these things the church is giving to the world. And it's not telling them you need to be a member, you have to pay tithing. No, just come and see. And it really is, to me, it's evidence. We need to be better, like you said. We need to be better at telling the story of the Church of Jesus Christ, because sometimes our critics take the narrative. And the truth is, the church is doing the most amazing things in the world. And I've witnessed those things. It's not just my little department, it's all of the departments. They're making an impact. Again, from Rexburg, Idaho, all the way to Rhode Island and Rome, just like Elder Bednar said, it's happening all over the world.
So if I were a stake president, how would I get a program like this in my area? Is it usually the area presidency says, hey, we think that this would be a good spot? Is it like up higher up, or is it more local where we say, we need this, bring this to us?
It's a great question. So really, the Succeed in School program, this is probably why you said, Melissa, you haven't heard about it. I didn't know about it either, really much about it before a year ago. It really just got out of pilot in the last year. And so we only had 5,000 students about a year and a half ago. And it's grown that quickly to 30,000 because of the demand. So an area presidency would be the ecclesiastical leaders if it's a new area. So this is, for example, an area we're not in yet is South America Northwest. The area, the area president or area presidency would meet with our team and say, we'd like to provide this educational resource to our youth. And so then because this program is governed just like BYU Idaho by the Church Board of Education, it goes all the way to the first presidency, and they would approve a new area for the program. We're currently in 8 of the church's 24 areas, so about a third of them. And so but we've had a lot of requests from lots of other areas, but we just frankly need to run faster than we have means, but we are going to probably be expanding this under their direction for the next few years.
But you're not in the United States, I'm guessing, because I know my kids that just finished high school. There's no way they're going to go to seminary and then high school and then do more 2 hours of school. My kids wouldn't do it.
Well, here's your alert. The area presidency approved, and the Board of Education approved Succeed in School in Utah, and in the North America Southwest area. And we have actually been in the Southwest area for a few years. And you're totally right. There's going to be people like your kids who are going to say that's just not going to work. But we're not looking at all 300 youth in a stake, right? It might be 30 youth in a stake. It might be if you look at a wider range of people. So you're going to probably find enough people that could benefit from it, just like you would have with a personal finance self-reliance course or something like that, who would say, you know what, I am going to go 2 days a week for just an extra hour to learn a study and life skill. And so, in fact, in Utah, we're launching not too far from me. And I've asked these same questions because I'm the program leader, and I'm like, because I looked at it, but then I realized when I've interviewed our students, I met with a young man in New Mexico about a year ago. Okay. And this is in the Navajo reservation, but this guy has a switch, he has access, just like anyone who lives in our areas. And his name's Caleb. I'm interviewing him with the local mission president. We're just sitting and visiting their house, and he's a Succeed in School student taking this, twice a week, 2 hours type of class. And he's sort of fidgeting like a deacon would, like a young person. He's just like, he's like, who's this weird guy in a tie in my living room, asking me questions. And all of a sudden I asked him, I said, Caleb, what have you learned from Succeed in School? And he sits up and he says, to have a growth mindset. And I'm like, it was the most non sequitur experience. I'm like, oh, okay. So you just were fidgeting, playing with your switch, and then you're just like, to have a growth. And I said, what does that mean? He says, well, I believe that I can pass my exams now. Before, I didn't have confidence that I could do that. But I learned some skills and some techniques how to do that. And it's helped bring my sister and I closer together because they're both students in the same class for Succeed in School. And so I was like, wow. So maybe, that's what your reaction, by the way, Matt, is completely natural, normal, because most people in the U.S. are like, this is a land of abundance. We don't need that. That's going to be for Africa, or that's for another place. But we are seeing, thousands of kids in the U.S. who are being impacted in positive ways too.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I can see it working really well even in my community. We have plenty of my students, I teach high school, who
Wonderful.
are trying to be the first generation to go into college. They don't have parents who have 2 hours a day after school to spend with them, teaching them, helping them with homework, getting them prepared. I see a lot of them stay after school and help their younger siblings try to, pass class and stuff like that. So I mean, I think it could be very valuable. I definitely could see it working. My question is this meant to be a feeder program into college?
Absolutely. In fact, here's the 30-second definition of Succeed in School program. It's an after-school program for youth ages 11, 18 that helps them progress academically in their existing schools, prepare for higher education, and become self-reliant disciples of Jesus Christ. So really that's the objective. So preparing for higher education is one of our three objectives, right? So that's why, so my kids, I'll just give you an example. Sorry, kids, if you're listening to this at some point, but one of my kids comes to me about a month or two ago and says, Dad, I'm getting a D in my class. And I'm like, why are you getting a D? And and she said, well, I turned in all my assignments. And I'm like, well, have you talked to your teacher? Yeah, I texted her. Okay. Have you like articulated your position of like that you turned it in, and did she understand? No, no. I realized that my daughter's missing this communication skill and this like organizational skill of how to do things. She's very smart. She knows how to do the work, but there was something lacking there. And I think a lot of our kids, as I look around the world, they're lacking skills to prepare for higher ed. You need to be able to organize your time. I mean, when you're a college freshman, that's why a lot of the CES schools are now offering this life skills course or this kind of college preparation course in the very beginning, because sometimes they don't get that. They may be very smart, but they don't know the soft skills, right? They don't know. And those are the skills that frankly, all of us really need to succeed. I think the LinkedIn CEO said that that's like the number one need in the job market right now is people that have soft skills. So that's what we're trying to teach and succeed in school as well as the academic hard skills.
Yeah. I talked with, this would be maybe 10, 12 years ago, but Kim Clark, when he was at BYU Idaho, he told me that what happens in college is kids will get to college and they're not quite prepared for maybe the intro English class or maybe the intro math class. And so then colleges put them in these remedial classes. And so students will spend like a year and they're spending tuition and they're in these remedial classes. And there was really no evidence that the remedial classes helped them get prepared for those intro classes because they were just missing like one skill, two skills. And so you're sitting in this remedial class and 80% of it, you're like, I already know this stuff. I already know this stuff. And so then when it gets to the part that you actually need to know, your brain's turned off and you're not ready to learn. And he's like, we're trying to figure out a way in the church that we can help students just get those little things that they need so that they can avoid all of that remedial stuff that doesn't help them in college.
You're absolutely right. And that's really, you just described in a nutshell what we're trying to do and succeed in school for youth all around the world. And what BYU Pathway is also trying to do as well is trying to address the skill deficit that's there, so that we can teach them those skills so they can succeed in life. Because at the end of the day, education should allow us to be able to serve more effectively and be better leaders.
Yeah. Let me ask you this because this is a different subject, but
You
my
bet.
wife loves teaching math, and from time to time we peruse the church service missionary opportunities. And there are always these missionary opportunities to like teach math at elementary schools, at these like middle schools and secondary schools that the church has around the world. Is that real? You could really go on a mission and just be a math teacher at a secondary school in the South Pacific?
It's a great question. So this is the other part of so I've been talking a lot about succeed in school, right? Which is sort of this more scalable educational model. But these 16 schools in the South Pacific and Mexico, we have missionaries all the time and they contribute wonderful things, including teaching math. So if she want, and they're all English speaking, they're all English immersion schools, even though they're ESL countries where they're learning English. So being able to do so is a big blessing. And we invite, frankly, all people that want to serve as missionaries. We got these beautiful schools. I said it's a really hard sell. In fact, our CFO at Seminaries and Institutes is a dear friend of mine. He's retiring here very soon, and I said, Craig, you know, it's really hard sell to you, but would you like to go to an island paradise and help youth learn for the next 2 years? And you and your wife can like go to the beach every day, and and he's just like, that sounds like an appealing mission. I said, yes. Yes, it is an appealing mission. You should join the cause. So yeah, so our church school system does require, and we do need help for all those wonderful students in the South Pacific.
If only they needed political science teachers. If only. Like I
Hey, we need to start. I'm just saying, we're happy to start. We need brilliant, people, who have good experience in church education to help us start things sometimes. So I don't know. There could be a joint political science math class in the future at the church schools.
I
We'll
see
have to
it.
see in a few years. Yeah, I could
Yeah.
see something like that happening.
What about like things that like construction and all of that sort of stuff, right? Are we doing those things too, or is it primarily because to me that seems like something very hard to teach online, but it's a really like valuable skill, right? How to put in drywall or something like that. Is that part of these programs?
It is, which it's actually in the Pacific and in Mexico. We have at all of our high schools a beautiful facilities, and you'd be very impressed in Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, and Mexico, and Kiribati. All five countries have these beautiful carpentry, welding, construction, electrician, agriculture, all these vocational training classes, and every youth is invited to participate so they can either choose academic or vocational, or they can do a blend of both, which we recommend, gaining lots of skills. I wish I had had that in my high school when I was dinking around and not paying attention, and whatever class I was in. Having a hard skill like that is very helpful for the future. And then the Board of Education and the area presidency in the Pacific last year requested that we, what we call, sweat the assets. We utilize our evening time when the daytime kids are taking classes. We've now opened it up for 3,000 adults in these countries to take to use all the facilities and resources
Wow.
for very minimal cost. We're using contracted teachers, using the existing real estate, the existing equipment. It's actually a very good way to leverage. So we're taking our 7,000 church school students population to 10,000 in the next couple of years with these night class students. And so that's another way that we're just emphasizing that all types of education matter. It's not just, and political science, I mean, it's really special. I mean, let's be clear. I
The
mean,
most.
people
Yeah.
have, people have written books about religion and political science, like definitely top of the educational, totem pole. But also those hard skills are good.
Yeah.
I was
This is
just
fantastic.
I'm fishing for a mission for Melissa and her
I know.
husband.
I knew that's what you were doing. Yeah. You just described me and my husband's dream mission. We'll go do the construction job. It will be fantastic. And Matt, you can just float on the beach and your wife can teach math and it'll
Yeah.
be a dream. Yeah. This
Yeah,
is really cool to
I'm
see how
liking
this
this.
all comes together though.
The Miles mission crew. It's going to be
Yeah.
awesome.
We're ready.
We're going to be very
I'll
blessed.
be in the back being like, does anybody want to know more about political parties? Does anybody?
U.S. politics, anybody? Anybody? I know we're in rural Tonga on a small island, but I'd love to tell you more.
I've been trying to start Political Scientists Without Borders, but there's zero demand. There's zero interest. Hey, well, John, it's been a delight chatting with you. I had hoped to talk with you more about your family because I love them all so much. But seriously, like I'm telling you, our listeners did not know about this stuff, and I think it's important that it gets out there because it's really, really cool.
Oh, you're kind. Yeah, we have Succeed in School, sis.churchofjesuschrist.org, byupathway.edu. They can read more about it. Volunteer opportunities are available for all the programs. Again, people just want to make a difference, right, in the world. And often we see that education is such a draw for our missionaries and our people who are called in our callings here to serve. And that's why I left Deloitte and Touche at a very good career track to come work for BYU Idaho and the Pathway program, because it really matters. And to me, it's worth the long hours and low pay.
But seriously, the work you guys do is so inspiring to me. Every time I talk to you guys, I'm like, man, I wish I could get more involved in that. But I don't want
Well,
lots of work and no pay, John. I want the
I know,
professor
I
life.
know. Lots of pay and lots of blessings. We'll see what we can figure out. We can negotiate later on, so we'll see.
Hey, well, thanks a lot. And
Thanks,
listeners,
guys.
we'll talk to you again soon.